Greetings, everyone, and thank you for attending our webcast today. My name is Leif Lowe, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. I'd like to welcome you to our presentation entitled Transforming Government IT with AWS, Commercial, FedRAMP, and GovCloud. This event is brought to you today by FCW and is sponsored by Pluralsight. Well, cloud computing is driving dramatic change and innovation across all industries. It's certainly true for federal agencies as well, but they face their own unique challenges. Constituents are demanding more services, more convenience, and more transparency, which agencies have to deliver at a lower cost and with lower staffing levels, which makes this transformation even tougher for government agencies. But during today's webcast, you'll learn more about what you need to know about cloud computing, how your agency can address the transition challenge, and why tech skills are so critical to your agency's success. Our featured speaker today is Kevin L. Jackson. Kevin is the CEO and founder of the GovCloud Network and a Pluralsight author. He's a globally recognized cloud computing expert, thought leader, industry influencer, and founder-author of the award-winning Cloud Musings blog. He's also been recognized as a top 100 cloud computing influencer and brand, and a top federal IT blog. In May of last year, Kevin was awarded an Information Security Leadership Award for his work with the U.S. federal government sector by the International Information System Security Certification Consortium, also known as ISC2. Mr. Jackson also regularly delivers a number of online courses through Pluralsight. Well, thanks again for joining us today. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First of all, if you'd like to enlarge the slide view during the presentation, just look for the square icon in the top right-hand corner of the slide window. You can also view the presentation in full screen mode if you'd like by clicking on the squared arrows icon. If you'd like to submit a question at any time, which we strongly encourage you to do, just look for the question field to the left of the slide window. Type your question in there and hit submit, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. If you should have any technical difficulties during the session, just look for the yellow question mark icon below the slide window. Click there and someone will be able to help you out. If you'd like to download a copy of the presentation you're about to see, just look for the Resource Center below the question field. Now finally, within the next day or two, we'll email you a link to an archived version of this webcast so you can review it again or pass it along and share with a colleague. The on-demand version of the webcast will be available for 90 days after today. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to Kevin.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And this webcast, I'm going to talk about how organizations, especially the government organizations, can improve their chances of being successful in transitioning to cloud. Most of this is because cloud computing is not really a technology. It's a way of doing things. It's a new models for doing things. So how do I know this? Because I've been working a lot with organizations as they transition to cloud computing. In fact, I did a lot of work with the U.S. federal government as they developed FedRAMP and a lot of policies. I've worked with the intelligence community. I've written a few books. My latest, Architecting Cloud Computing Solutions, is all about linking business and mission goals to the transition to cloud. And I am a certified architect in cloud, including Amazon Web Services. One of the things that people really don't understand is how we got to cloud computing across the entire industry. It wasn't a revolution. It really was an evolution from starting way back in the ancient days of the 70s, when the focus was on big infrastructure. And people were using terminals, and these terminals became personal computers. The networks were kind of decentralized, and relational databases and thick client terminals were what everyone used for business. I'm sure you remember the days where you had a big box underneath your desk that was connected to a big monitor on top of the desk. And before you had to install an application, you would have to actually look on the side panel of the box to figure out if you had enough storage or enough CPU or the hardware capabilities to actually run the application you were about to install. And when you needed to have something installed in your agency, you would have to call the help desk and schedule a time when someone would come up and sit next to your desk to install an application while you went off and got a piece of coffee, a cup of coffee. Those were the days where we had tightly coupled applications, and the applications needed to have specifically designed databases behind them. And that database was sitting on your computer, that box underneath your desk. In the 80s, we saw the rise of the internet, and people started to use networking, and email became the killer app in organizations. Devices got smaller and smaller. They became visually attractive. First, you were connected to your neighbor in the next cube, then to the next floor, then you were connected to the next building across the street. Eventually, you were able to leverage the internet to connect to anyone, anywhere around the world. The applications left your devices underneath the desk, and they became available on the internet. Businesses wanted to exploit this wide area network. So they said, let's take our applications, our databases, and instead of having people have data at their desk, we would put it in a centralized server. And then everybody would share that server. On top of that, we would be able to put our business and mission models embedded into these databases. And we could dictate how people use this information so that we can be more efficient and more effective. That relational database became a structured database that reflected how we did our mission, how we did our business. As people started using mobile devices, we became further detached from this centralized database. The distance became further and further. We became mobile. And network latency started to affect how these tightly coupled applications, where the state of the application resided in the back-end server, these applications started to fail because of network latency and application timeouts. The executives yelled at the software developers and say, you better fix this. We can't use applications like this over the internet. So the answer was to take the state of the applications from the back end and bring it to the front. So instead of having the state of these applications in the server, we put them in a front-end client. This client became a browser, the thin client that we see today. With that change, the applications became mobile, more useful over the internet. This was great timing because we had the explosion of data, wireless mobility. Google revolutionized search by using a little-known technique called MapReduce, where you no longer needed structured databases in the back end to find information. Instead of using structured query language, or SQL, we were now able to use NoSQL databases like Mongo and Cassandra. So we could put information and it didn't have to be structured based upon our business model. This led into agile business and agile mission. Could you imagine trying to put a relational database to find the information in the internet? which drove a widespread use of browsers in the thin client. The use of virtualization in the back end enabled elastic and scalable resources. And this is when cloud computing was born as an operational model. So in order for this to be successful, we had to change our applications from these tightly coupled applications to loosely coupled applications. We went to elastic and scalable infrastructures where the application no longer had to be tied to a single physical server. We leveraged agile businesses, the ability to change on the fly how we use information and data. And instead of using applications, we transitioned to the adoption of services. All these changes drove us to use other people's infrastructure, cloud service providers' infrastructure. So since we no longer had control of the infrastructure, we had to figure out new ways to protect our information. All the old ways of using the infrastructure and preventing, unwanted users on the infrastructure no longer worked. I call it the wall and moat model for security. Remember, if you got on the network, you had access to the information. The key was to keep people off the network. That no longer worked because you didn't own the network anymore. This drove a change. The change was the adoption of a data-centric security model where you need to protect your data no matter what infrastructure it was running on. This is the change that every organization has to go through if they want to leverage cloud computing. So why use cloud computing? You use it to reduce IT complexity because now you can put this work on someone else. Since you no longer have to buy hardware and buy software, you can transition to a consumption-based pricing and only pay for what you use. This gives you more agility. Your business can change quicker because your data is no longer structured. You can access information for whatever you need at any time, and you can change your processes. More flexibility, more collaboration. This also enables you to do more processes. Instead of sticking to serial processes where you have to go stepwise 1, 2, 3, 4 until you finish and go to the next process, you can operate in a more parallel nature because you have more resources, more capabilities, more flexibility. This is why cloud computing has become so valuable in the marketplace. But there's a lot of reasons and complaints why you shouldn't use cloud computing. There's a perceived loss of control because your data is no longer in your data center. It could be floating anywhere in the cloud. This security model thing, going from this infrastructure-centric security model to a data-centric security model, this puts a lot of pressure on me to know what my data is. I can no longer just protect everything. And in this new world with this data explosion, I can't afford to keep all the data that I use. This really drives cultural changes too. People no longer want to come work in one place all the time. They want to be able to work wherever they are, at home, on the beach, on vacation. We're now transitioning to this 24/7, 395 ability to do work. I don't know if it's good or bad, but we're there. And there's also a consumerization of information technology. Remember the time when the agency or the organization were able to dictate what type of computer you used, what type of application you used? That's gone by the wayside too, because now we have BYOD, The worst day of the year is the day after the Christmas break when everybody comes in with the brand new devices and they want to connect it to the agency network. You can no longer dictate information technology. You have to go with the newest. How are you going to use Alexa in your agency? You ever think about that? This has driven application development changes and design changes. Your application developers need to know how to use and leverage REST APIs instead of SOAP APIs. Your operations team needs to transition from a physical infrastructure to all virtual infrastructure. You need to go from bespoke IT designs to general, commoditized, highly standardized solutions. Change is difficult, and you're being forced to do this with the, quote, cloud-first policy. So what is cloud? Well, when the federal government first started, there wasn't a real definition. In fact, in the government, in order to do anything, the first thing you need to do is have a definition of what you're going to buy. Since there wasn't one, the then CTO, Vivek Kundra, commissioned the National Institute of Standards and Technology to create or develop a definition for cloud computing. That definition is shown here. I'm going to go through it, though, because it's very important to understand what NIST said. This is actually the broadest adopted definition of cloud computing globally. And I recommend you use it to establish your own agency definition of what cloud is. Use this as a starting point. The first sentence there says, cloud computing is a model. It didn't say cloud computing is a technology because it isn't a technology. It's a model. It's a way of doing things. Cloud computing is an operational model. It's an economic model. It's business models. They're mission models. Okay? You can't install a specific technology or pick a specific technology and be leveraging cloud computing. You have to look at the way you do your business and change it to adopt cloud. So it is a model. It's not a technology. And this model is used for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, and on-demand network access. So all of the services that you need in your mission or your organization, you want to enable convenient access over the network. Now, this network doesn't necessarily have to be the open public internet. It could be a private network, but you select the network, you select the services based upon the requirements of your targeted consumers, your customer set, the marketplace that you're targeting. When I worked with the intelligence community, they didn't want to put their applications over the open internet, of course not. But their customers were the military, the intelligence community. So they used their own private global network. That's perfectly fine. So it's a model for enabling this on-demand access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources, not a static set of resources. It was network, servers, storage, applications, and services. But what's key here is that it's a shared pool of resources. This drives cloud economics. Resource sharing drives cloud economics. Many people say, okay, I want to go to the cloud and I want to save money, but I'm going to go to a private cloud because I don't trust. I don't think cloud computing is secure. Well, if you go to a private cloud, you're not sharing resources. That means you're violating this definition of cloud computing, and you can't save money. It actually costs you more money to build a private cloud than it would to have a bespoke, well-designed traditional data center. So resource sharing is key to the economic savings that you may expect in cloud computing. And finally, it said these resources are rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. This implies a high degree of automation. Automated services also require a high degree of standardization. If you don't have high standardization, you can't automate. These are all critical to leveraging cloud computing. The key drivers for going to cloud has been the shift from capital expenditure or paying for hardware and software that you may not use at a high efficiency to operational expenditure, where you can only pay for what you use when you use it. Other drivers for cloud computing include scalability, elasticity, the virtualization, reduced cost, and mobility, the ability to access this information from anywhere, the ability to enhance collaboration, and to reduce your risk with respect to information technology. All of these things leverage the key cloud computing characteristics. This on-demand self-service, where cloud resources can be provisioned wherever and whenever they are required. You can access it over the network. This resource pooling, as I said before, it can be used by multiple users, and it's scaled and adjusted as needed to meet any performance needs and requirements. You can obtain additional resources just by requesting them. And one of the sweetest things is that all of your resources are measured. So it's controlled and reported, so you know exactly what you're using. This is something that has eluded traditional data centers for a long time. The service models in cloud computing are basically three. The infrastructure of the service, which are the data centers, the connectivity to hardware and the facilities where you consume these compute and storage services from, gives us you ability to scale up, scale down based on usage, reduces the cost of ownership. It also requires the highest amount of skill set from your staff. Platform as a service, this is really the middleware, integration and middleware. It's a development environment for your developers. You can select operating systems. You can be globally consistent. You can have more diverse sources for your development environment. It can also reduce cost of licensing. And finally, software as a service, where if you want to minimize the skill set you need in your organization, you want to go all in for SaaS, or software as a service. Because with SaaS, all you do is consume an application, the entire business flow, an entire business process. You can configure it, but you don't need many staff to run it. It's run for you automatically. You get automatic updates. You get automatic patch management and global standardization. So if you want to reduce staff, SaaS is the way to go. Deployment models, there are 4 deployment models. The private cloud deployment model, where you have increased control over your data and underlying systems. You own everything. You have governance. You have assurance of where your data is. but it does cost the most. You have public cloud, easy, inexpensive, very streamlined. It can scale, no wasted resources, but you have less control. The community cloud deployment model, which really is built around common governance. In the U.S. federal government, FedRAMP, the Federal Risk Authorization and Management Program, was developed specifically to have a government community cloud. Within the government community cloud, everyone has a common governance platform. You get most of the benefits of public cloud, but you can have higher privacy, higher security, and higher regulatory control. It's more expensive than a public cloud, but the cost is shared across the entire community. The final deployment model is a hybrid cloud. And a hybrid cloud is essentially a combination of these three: public, private, or community. So you can use a private with a public or community with a private. It's a very cost-effective way of fulfilling non-differentiating business functions. So what is hybrid? Okay. I just talked about a hybrid cloud, which it could be a combination of these deployment models: public, private, private community, public and community, or maybe all three. But there's also in the marketplace, people talk about hybrid IT. Hybrid IT is a little different. Hybrid IT is using cloud, but also using other forms of information technology. You can use a traditional data center in cloud. You can use traditional data center in a managed service provider. A managed service provider in cloud, or all three. The difference here is that in a traditional data center, you are running the data center and you dictate the governance. In a managed service provider, while you don't run the data center, you're hiring somebody else to do it, you still dictate the governance because you do it contractually. With a cloud service provider, a cloud service provider dictates the governance. They provide a set number of services, and you have to accept what the cloud service provider provides to you. So for that lower cost, you sort of give up the ability to drive the governance. Okay. But any organization of any significant size will probably need some type of hybrid IT strategy. So your strategy, you need to look at your requirements for a traditional data center, a managed service provider, and cloud services. So in doing this, it's important to understand what a cloud service provider, how they're organized. So a cloud consists of a site with multiple data centers, but not just one data center, multiple data centers. And these data centers are in availability zones. Here I have 2 data centers in availability zone 1A. Different regions have multiple availability zones. So here I have Cloud Region 1 with 2 availability zones, Zone 1A and 1B. Large global clouds like Amazon Web Services have multiple regions. Here I have Region 1, Region 2, Region 3. Each of the regions have multiple data centers, multiple availability zones, and different services. In fact, if you're consuming infrastructure as a service, which is the primary service for Amazon, you as a consumer need to select which availability zone you're going to use, which region you're going to use, and you actually have to set up network between these regions. Yes, they are services that you select from Amazon, but you have to design it. So the Amazon global infrastructure is wide, all right? These are all of the regions that Amazon offers globally. There are brand new regions coming this year in Bahrain, Cape Town, South Africa, Hong Kong, and Milan. For the U.S. federal government, there are two specific regions that you'd be interested in. U.S. East and U.S. West are the regions that are FedRAMP certified. All right? Also, GovCloud. So U.S. East is in Northern Virginia and Ohio, and then U.S. West is in Northern California and Oregon. GovCloud, there's a GovCloud East and a GovCloud West. The difference between, although both of these regions, all these regions are FedRAMP certified, GovCloud is also ITAR, International Trafficking in Arms Regulations certified. So if you need to meet the State Department ITAR regulations, you need to leverage GovCloud. One thing we talked about is that each region has different services. Not all regions have the same services. This quote was from Forbes. Just a few years ago, AWS had a handful of services. And in 2018, there were over 20 categories and over 90 plus services. So the portfolio can be very, very complicated. So the first thing you need to do before you go to Amazon or any cloud service provider is determine which services you need. And that's going to be driven by the value cloud can deliver to your organization. There's a study done by IBM for the best business enablers that cloud can provide, how to align cloud computing with mission requirements. And these are the top 6 enablers: reducing business cost and increasing the ability to scale, being adaptable within your mission space, masking the complexity of information technology from your end users, being able to change your services based upon context of your consumers or users, and being able to improve connectivity with your broader ecosystem, your mission partners. The very first thing you need to do before you go into a cloud strategy is understand why you're using cloud. Which of these enablers are key to your ability to complete your mission? After that, you need to select the specific services that you may want to use. As I said, not all services are in all regions. So this is the first of 5 or 6 slides. And I'm going to go through these slides fairly rapidly, but it's online. There's the URL underneath the title. But these are all of the services in Amazon that are either FedRAMP certified or available in GovCloud. Note that FedRAMP certified services can only support usage up to FSMA moderate with respect to the data. If you have FSMA high requirements, then you need to go to GovCloud. So you figure out why you're going to the cloud, what type of data you're going to use when you go to the cloud, and then determine what services you need. Here you can see not all services are actually available. Only the services with a check mark are actually available for consumption. Other services are in different state of FedRAMP review. This is important because if you need a particular service for your mission, it may not be available in AWS East, West, or GovCloud. So the timeline can affect your ability to actually transition to cloud. These services, this page is updated often as these services transition through FedRAMP certification. So your team must be aware of your business model, your mission model, the services that are required, and also the timeline required to deliver on your services. All of this is important in your strategy. You also have to think about how you will manage your cloud services. You probably don't want everyone having access to every cloud service that's available from Amazon. You have to have some team internal to your organization to review new services as they are released. You have to have some type of process internal to identify, review, and approve privileged users in both your developers and IT operations group. You also have some super users that will be able to do extra things. For instance, creating virtual private clouds and managing your security groups, or reviewing and approving new services. If you're going to be using multiple cloud service providers, you may need cloud service brokerage. So even if you're only using AWS, you may be consuming commercially available services, GovCloud services, and or FedRAMP services. And your team would have to manage all that, let alone if you're also going into another cloud service provider like Microsoft Azure. So what type of team will I need? Well, you will need, this gives you sort of a high-level overview of the roles that you will need filled in your cloud transition. You will need a cloud administrator, someone who's interacting and interfacing with your cloud service provider. You will need a cloud service manager that will review, update, keep track of changes with respect to the services that your organization is consuming. The cloud service provider change and add services constantly. Amazon added over 200 services last year. You'll have members of your team that actually operate the services and manage the storage. You'll have an architecture team that will architect the use of the different services and how the data is being used, where it's being stored, what type of data storage you're going to be using. And you'll have a developer team that will be that may be leveraging platform as a service to develop applications. So your team will need to be trained on not just the general aspects of cloud computing, but the specific AWS technologies in these different regions. Your technical skill set, your developers will need to understand the use of REST APIs versus the use of SOAP, because most legacy applications use SOAP APIs. You have to understand the importance of developing loosely coupled applications versus tightly coupled applications so that you could leverage these elastic and scalable infrastructures. All of your applications will need to encrypt, be able to use encrypted data. Data in the cloud should be encrypted at rest, in motion, and in use. Most traditional data centers, they actually do not encrypt their data when they're in the data center. So you'll have to modify your applications to deal with encrypted data in the cloud. Auto-scaling and microservices. These are skill sets your developers need to build. Your IT operators need to get comfortable with infrastructure as software, because you're getting away from managing physical hardware. Leveraging and using tools like Puppet and Chef, Ansible and Salt to design, do configuration, management, deployment, provisioning of your hardware. You'll need to leverage, get more standardized with your infrastructure and learn how to use serverless and get into the DevSecOps cycle. This is a methodology that completely leverages automation so that you could support quick development, security review and approval, and deployment of all your applications within a cloud environment. Your organizational interactions will change as well. This is not an IT thing. While you will have a hybrid IT platform with cloud managed service providers and maybe even a traditional data center, you'll have to select specific services that you're going to be consuming. Is it infrastructure, platform, or software as a service? There are different ways of purchasing these services, all the way from on-demand, which is a traditional economic model for cloud computing, to reservations, which is more where you have to commit to buying services over a year or a 3-year term. It's more expensive than on demand, but it's less expensive than buying your own hardware. You can even have dedicated servers in a cloud AWS environment or Spot. These are all different economic models. And these economic models will drive the cost of you delivering on your mission. So your mission requirements, your scalability, agility, your flexibility, and availability of your mission services will be driven or linked to your economic model. So it's not just your IT team that has to understand cloud, but your business owners, your mission owners, your acquisition team, and your legal team, because this goes into managing your data as well. This will drive your schedule, your budget, and your performance. So your interactions across your organization can change drastically because of cloud. Your organization will go on through multiple transitions, from a security framework where you're going from infrastructure-centric to data-centric. Your applications are going from tightly coupled to loosely coupled. Your data is going from mostly structured to unstructured. Your mission and business processes from serial to parallel. Your security control, it's no longer just an enterprise responsibility. It's a shared responsibility with your cloud service provider. Your economic model is going from CapEx to OpEx, infrastructure, from physical to mostly virtual. Your IT operations are going from manual to automated, and your operational scope is expanding. all of your internal governance needs to be reviewed and modified to take all of these transitions into effect. Managed services is different than cloud services. For a managed service provider, you can dictate technology that's used. You have help desk service. You can have remote monitoring, predictable billing model. But with a cloud service provider, the cloud service provider will dictate the technology that's being used. The cloud service provider dictates the operating procedure. There's probably no help desk. The customer is responsible for monitoring and managing all its assets, and you have a pay-by-use billing model. This in and of itself could modify your internal operations policies. And before you go into the cloud, before you commit to any particular cloud service provider, you need to review the cloud service agreements, which include the customer agreement that will describe the overall relationship between the customer and the provider. What's acceptable use for the cloud services? There is consistency across many providers, but some specific details of each service may affect your ability to deliver on your mission. And finally, your service level agreements. You need to link your mission needs and requirements to what the service level agreements will deliver to your organization. So when you're evaluating the cloud service agreement, make sure you understand the roles and responsibilities within your organization. Evaluate all of your mission policies and business level policies. Understand the differences between the service models and deployment models, and make sure they align with your mission goals. Identify your critical performance objectives. These will typically be the measures, the metrics associated with the services that you are consuming. Evaluate the security and privacy requirements that you need. Identify your service management requirements, and also have a process in place in case a service fails. If a service fails, you may lose a mission goal or lose ability to deliver on a mission. Understand and have a disaster recovery plan. Develop and improve the governance process to include a hybrid IT, and know how to leave a cloud service provider. Your data policies, you need to understand how you need to preserve your data, how redundant you need with your data, know where your data is. What about data seizure? What about legal requirements on your data? What are the responsibilities of the cloud service provider? What about data privacy? Don't forget, many of you may have European Union citizens working in your organization. That means you need to protect their data in accordance with the General Data Protection Regulation. Data availability, which could affect your mission, and change management and notification. When your cloud service provider changes its service, how will that affect your ability to deliver on your mission? All right. Also review all of your business level policies, your acquisition policies, your procurement policies, your legal policies. All of these can be affected by going into the cloud. And take the time to build a business model or a mission model and link your mission objectives to specific key performance indicators. Those key performance indicators will more than likely link to metrics that the cloud service provider will provide for delivery of their services, including availability and response time. And don't forget security and privacy. Understand your asset sensitivity, operational security requirements, legal data residency, and any restrictions that you may need with respect to personal data and privacy. The key to your success here is to review and update all your internal policies and process, develop a very strong business or mission case and strategy for cloud computing, assess the provider's service agreement against your functional and non-functional requirements, make sure you know how to monitor the CSAs, the cloud service providers, CSP's performance. Make sure you have an adequate disaster recovery plan that encompasses your cloud service provider, and make sure you know and have support for an efficient exit process should that be required. With that, I've finished my presentation, and I'll pass it over.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. That sets some great detailed context for making the cloud transition. All right, we've got time for a couple of quick questions now, but first of all, just want to remind everyone that you can download a copy of the presentation you just saw. There's some great information in there. Just look for the Resource Center below the question field. All right, to start off with, Kevin, now, once an agency determines that it's ready to make this transition, what would you say are some of the critical first steps it needs to take before making that move?
So as I said, that's a very good question. Like I said, the most important thing is to understand why you're going to the cloud. You need to review your applications as a portfolio. Understand which are the key applications for your mission. What are the key metrics that would link to the key performance indicators, and make decisions based upon the return on investment, not the financial return on investment, although there should be, but the return on your improvement in business, improvement in your mission delivery. The worst reason for going to the cloud is to try to save money. Yeah. Focus on your performance objectives.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like any agency's plan can't possibly be too detailed. It sounds like you can't plan enough.
No.
Well, in your experience, you've certainly worked with a lot of different agencies and seen a lot of organizations work through this transition. What are some of the common mistakes you've seen, either agencies or other organizations make, and how can they avoid those?
Yeah, the number one mistake I've seen is organizations thinking that cloud is just running your applications in another data center, and that you can treat it just like a data center or just like a managed service provider. You can't just take your requirement to a cloud service provider and expect them to change their services. They won't. You can do that with a managed service provider, but the services that a provider provides is what they provide. They won't change them. So you need to review those services, and it's up to you to determine if it's appropriate for your mission.
Yeah.
The other thing is that this is not a technology thing. Yes, you're talking about consuming technology services, but you will change your acquisition model. There are legal issues. The project manager will have different roles and different capabilities. You'll need to link your goals with respect to your mission to the economic model and the KPIs of the services and the SLA for the services. This is a team effort. It's not just an IT thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the distinction you made earlier in the presentation that cloud computing is a model, not a technology, not a discrete technology.
Right.
All right. Now, how can an agency, looking at where they are, right when they're planning on making their cloud migration, how can an agency ensure that their workforce has sufficient skill sets in order to make sure they're well prepared for a cloud migration?
Oh no, that's good. The first thing is many organizations pick a cloud service provider and then they dictate everyone go to that cloud service provider.
Yeah.
And then that's a big problem because vendor lock-in in a cloud is just as bad as vendor lock-in in technology. When you get locked into specific technology, the first thing you should do is have your staff, not just your IT staff, but your acquisition staff, your project management staff, and your business and mission owners go through some general training on what cloud computing is. Understand the different operational models, understand the legal ramifications, understand the changes in your acquisition that need to be done, and then develop a strategy based upon a review of your portfolio and your mission requirements. Education is key, and understanding what your goals or setting specific goals and specific metrics will enable you to select the right cloud service provider and the right services.
Okay. All right. We have time for one more quick question here, I think. Are there any restrictions on what kind of data can be put into a FedRAMP-approved service?
Yes. So what data can be put into a FedRAMP-approved service? One of the biggest issues is that many agencies don't know enough about their data. They don't have a good data management or data governance process in place.
Yep.
One of the first things you need to do is review your data management and data classification. FISMA high, moderate, or low is not sufficient to manage your data. You need to understand if the data has any privacy issues, if it's related to any has contractual constraints. You also need to understand how sensitive that data is, because some of the most sensitive information in data probably should not go into the cloud and should remain in your traditional data center. So you need to review the consequences of data compromise or data loss, and that needs to be part of your data management or data governance process. So you need to update it.
That makes sense. Makes perfect sense. All right. Well, that is about all the time we have for today. I'd like to give a huge thanks to Kevin Jackson for a very informative and detailed session. Covered some great material here today. And I'd also like to thank Pluralsight for sponsoring this webcast. And I want to remind those of you listening that, again, within the next day or two, we'll email you a link to an archive version of this session so you can review it again or even pass along to share with a colleague. Thank you very much for attending today, and this concludes today's webcast.